So in this video, we're going to finish off some of the basic anatomy, bone, skeletal stuff with some reasonably similar joints, the hands and the feet. So we'll start up top, the hands. Maybe you've just watched the upper arm bone video, but we have the shoulder complex coming down to the elbow, and then the wrist itself is quite complicated, especially in terms of bones. Lots of little bits in there, 8 main bones in the wrist. There's some big important ones, scaphoid and whatnot, underneath the thumb. 2 rows, very articulate. We can do lots of different movements with our wrists, and so we need to be very aware of them, which is why we talked previously about the rotation coming from the shoulder, being aware of where our elbow is, rotation coming from the elbow, being aware that our shoulder is stable and still, which we need to do, being a hypermobile joint. And then that's sort of how we get our palm down, especially for weight-bearing things in yoga and other exercises. So basically, if our wrists stay open, they're good. If we start to close them too much or put too much pressure on one side or the other, they get sore. So making sure the rotation's coming from somewhere else really helps. The smaller joint should be protected by the bigger joint and or the alignment. So then into the hand, we have, they're called the carpals or the wrist bones, then the metacarpals, then the phalanges or phalanges at the end. And so there's lots of ways we can bend and move our fingers. The phalangeal joints are at the end. The metacarpals form the palm, and then that should be a similar arch like the foot. Again, connective tissue and stuff we'll talk about a little bit later. And then the carpals down here. So making sure they're stable and even is sort of where we're at. And learning some of the individual bones of the wrist and ankle are important and valuable, but we'll do that again in a more specialized video where this is the basics of things you need to know. So as long as you know it's a complicated joint, the palm is important, the metacarpals, and then the distal fingers, which you can see sometimes need a good chiropractor and or they're very small, flimsy joints, so we want to make sure they stay stable and balanced. We don't want to end up with one finger shooting off in an odd direction. So similar joint down at the bottom of the pelvis or hip, through the femur, tib fib, down to the foot. So the foot and ankle joint, a little more complicated and or diverse in that there's basically 2 joints. There's one that'll go side to side and one that'll go point and flex. So technically there's 2 joints in here around the ankle, but again, something we'll come back to in terms of, well, as long as you know your foot should be stable, not too much in, not too much out, not too much in your toes, not too much in your heels, then you're doing pretty good. The tib fib come down, and remember the outside ankle bones that we're kind of more aware of here, the medial malleolus, the lateral malleolus, they're actually the shin bones coming down. And so the shin bones basically come down together, and then the ankle bone fits up inside. So then that's where the stability comes from, why there can be the side-to-side motion as well as this up and down motion through the ankle joint, because we have these sort of stabilizer bars, if you will, on the outside, and then the foot can move around inside of there, which is part of what helps us with our balance. This is where most of our balance should come from, maybe a little bit in the pelvis, not so much in the knee. So it comes down, and you have the talus, or the main bone here, and that's sort of the one that fits in between the 2 prongs or balance pieces, the calcaneus or the calcanean tendon, Achilles tendon, or the heel bone. And then there's a whole bunch again, similarly kind of 2 rows of bones through the foot down to the tarsals, down to the metatarsals, down to the phalangeal again. So that's some of the similarity. The palm and sort of the main ball of the foot, kind of main mid-arch of the foot, very similar to the palm. Distal fingers, very close to the distal or tips of the toes. So again, you can see they're fairly fine joints, and we don't want to spend a lot of time cracking or popping them, especially when you get down to the little ones down here. You can see there's tiny little bones available. So stubbing the little toe can be a problem. The bump on the outside of the 5th metatarsal or outside of your pinky toe is important. If that ever gets squeezed by tape or a shoe or something, then the foot can't spread like it's supposed to when it goes down, not like the palm spreading when it goes down. If it can't, then that really hurts. So that's something you want to be aware of. And when people get the bumps and nubbins on their toes, basically if there's a constant rubbing, your body tries first to make it red, lets you know there's a problem, then a blister or a little bit of a kind of a soft cushiony padding. Then if that doesn't work, it becomes a harder blister. If that doesn't work, it becomes an ossification or a bone or a bunion or something like that supposed to show up. And basically if there's repeated stress in the same spot in the bone, the body tries to do something to make it work. So we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the arches and whatnot, as long as you know there's the distal phalanges or the tiny little bones at the end, the bigger bones in the midfoot or the mid-hand, the heavier weight-bearing bones in the foot and or the very mobile joints in the wrist, the tarsals and carpals, and that they both kind of connect down to the other bones. So here we have the tib fib coming down, here we have the radius and ulna coming down, and you can see there's not that same kind of strapping motion through here. Part of the reason why we have more mobility again in our upper body, less mobility in our lower body, but a more stable lower body, and it's more often to have sort of wrist issues, or you can have tiny little dislocations right there in your wrist, which feel really good when they get put back in, not so good when they're out, but it happens way more common up here, whereas dislocating something in your ankle is quite severe and may or may not need surgery, but it definitely needs an intervention. Stable, not mobile. So where we're heading to with some of our muscle and connective tissue videos coming soon.